let us go to the next section, that is blood vessels. Now, when we are going to talk about blood vessels, we are going to understand something first. When we were talking about circulation, we said that for the entire circulation, for any circulation of any fluid, you need two essential things. First thing is a motor, okay, and second one are tubes or pipes. Right. Now motor, it acts as a pumping station and in both the cases it is heart, whereas pipes, they what do? They are mostly associated with carrying the fluid. The pipes are mostly associated with carrying and circulating fluid throughout the body. Circulating fluid throughout the body, whatever body it is. Right. Now, these pipes are called as vessels, and you have two types of vessels, lymphatic vessels or lymph vessels if they are carrying lymph fluid, and blood vessels if they are carrying blood. Okay, so to answer the question as to what are blood vessels, well, blood vessels are these hollow tubular structures which carry blood. How are they carrying blood? From the pumping station, which is heart, they carry the blood to various tissues of the body. From the tissues, they collect the blood, again they send it to heart. This is oxygenated blood, this is deoxygenated blood. Okay, and at the same time they take the blood and they move it to various, the organ called as the lungs for the oxygenation. The deoxygenated blood goes to the lungs and the oxygenated blood comes out. So this movement of blood, the circulation of blood among the body is carried out by blood vessels. Now, the study of blood is called angiology, and you have three main type of blood vessels. The arteries and the veins are the major blood vessels, and capillaries are the another type. So three sets of blood vessels that we talk about, and the study is called angiology. Now, arteries, as the name itself says, and as something that we have studied since we are in school, they are the ones that carry blood from heart to body parts. And what type of blood? They mostly carry oxygenated blood. And these arteries, they further narrow down to become arterioles, that and further narrow down to become capillaries. Right. Now there is an exception to this. We have already spoken about this. The exception are the umbilical artery, and the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery. These two arteries, they don't carry oxygenated blood, they carry deoxygenated blood. In fact, pulmonary artery, it carries the deoxygenated blood to the lungs, which we will see when you go to double circulation. Okay. Next are veins. Now veins start from the capillaries and they carry blood. What blood they are talking about here? We are talking about the deoxygenated blood. So they carry the deoxygenated blood from the tissues through the capillaries into the heart. From capillaries they enlarge into venules and veins, and again they have two exceptions, that is umbilical vein and pulmonary vein. Now both of them carry oxygenated blood. The function of pulmonary veins, you will see it when you go to the double circulation. Right. So let us understand the histology of the artery, and of the vein. So we have here the tiers of artery and tiers of vein, and we are going to understand the various internal parts of it. In fact, the TS, when we talk about the anatomy of artery and veins, we know that the arteries contains a lumen because it's a tube-like structure, right? It is practically a structure like this. It's a tube. It's a hollow tube. It's an empty hollow tube, like how we are drawing here, right? So this tube has got a lumen in the center, the empty hollow space which is called as lumen, and then you have the wall layers. Right. So here what we have done is we have extended that wall layers for you to see. Now let me just remove this diagram. So this part will be the lumen, and I'll write it here, the lumen. Okay, now these are the wall layers. These are the wall layers. These together here are the wall layers. Now there are three layers of the walls which are commonly seen in both arteries and veins. The outermost layer is called tunica externa or tunica adventitia. Tunica externa or tunica adventitia. So this is the tunica externa. Right. After that, you have the middle layer. The middle layer is called tunica media. This is called as tunica media. Right. So here it is, tunica media. And you get the lowermost layer or the innermost layer, which is tunica interna. Tunica interna. Interna. And here is also tunica interna. Right. So these are the various layers of the walls of the arteries and veins, and they're common. If you observe the diagram very closely, then you will see that even though the layer names are the same, there is slight difference. Difference in what? Difference in the thickness of the walls. Difference in the thickness of each walls, if you can see, and difference in the composition of the walls. Difference in the composition of the walls. Okay, so let us see each wall in detail. Now, tunica externa is the outermost layer, and it is mostly composed of collagen fibers. It is mostly composed of collagen and elastic fibers. So it is made up of collagen and elastic fibers. Right, and this one, as you can see, it is more thicker. It is more thicker in the arteries, whereas it is very thin in the veins. And this tunica externa, it is stretchable and it is flexible, it is elastic, and it can stretch and withstand the internal blood pressure. And that's why this is thicker in your arteries, because the blood flowing in arteries contains a lot of pressure, so you need a lot of thicker walls to withstand the blood pressure. The second one is tunica media, which is basically made up of smooth muscles and elastic fibers. It is basically made up of smooth muscle and again elastic fibers. And you can see this tunica media, it is thinner in the veins, whereas it is thicker in the arteries. Okay, next is the tunica interna. Tunica interna consists of a basement membrane and endothelial cells. It contains a basement membrane plus endothelial cells. Right? So if I have to put it, then these cells, these blue cells here, these are our endothelial cells, right? And this structure here, this is the basement membrane. Right? And in the tunica interna of the arteries, they are made up of, they also contain, means along with the simple basement membrane and endothelial cells, you will also contain collagen fibers, and you will also contain elastic fibers, which is not present in the tunica interna of the vein. Okay. So here are the various walls. You have the interna with the endothelium cells. You can see it, the basement membrane, the internal elastic membrane, which is a part of the tunica interna, then the smooth muscular tunica media, and the external tunica externa. Now, this is the artery and this is the vein. In the vein, can you see these structures? These structures are called valves. Right. Now these valves, they are forming from the endothelial membrane. So the endothelial cells of the tunica interna, they form this particular flap-like structure. Now what do these flaps do? These flaps or folds, which are called as valves. Now they prevent the backflow of the blood. See, in veins are carrying the blood against the gravity. Specifically, if the veins are coming from the lower part of the body and if they have to go to the heart, the movement is against the gravity. So when blood is moving through them, when blood is moving like this, it, due to the pressure of the gravity, it tends to backflow like this. It tends to come back. So these flaps, what they do, they push the blood up, preventing the backflow. So that is something you will see in the veins, but you will not see it in the arteries, because arteries, they are going it along with the gravitational force or along with the gravity. So we were just talking about whenever we represent blood capillaries, we just draw it like this. We draw the endothelial cells like this, right, followed by the basement membrane. You must have seen such a similar diagram when we were talking about the blood clotting cascade and all, right? So this is how generally blood vessels are represented, with the endothelial cells and the basement membrane. The other layers are generally not mentioned, but they are present. Just because these layers are more important, they are more clearly represented whenever blood vessels are spoken about. So this is the structures of the arteries and veins. Now what we are going to do is we are going to have a tabular analysis to understand the difference between arteries and veins. So under the differences between arteries and veins, the first difference we are going to see is the location. Arteries are mostly deep seated. That means they are present within the body or within the musculature system, whereas veins are superficial. You can see them beneath the skin, in fact. Okay. Second one is direction of blood flow. Arteries move blood away from the heart, whereas veins bring the blood towards the heart. Next is the nature of the blood. As we have discussed, arteries carry oxygenated blood except pulmonary artery, whereas veins carry deoxygenated blood except pulmonary veins. The next is color of the blood. Arteries have bright red color blood due to the oxygenation, presence of the oxygen, whereas the veins have dark red blood because of the deoxygenation and more levels of the carbon dioxide. As we've already seen, the walls of the arteries are thicker, whereas the veins are very thin. The next one is when it comes to the tunica externa, the arteries are made up of connective tissue, which is collagen and elastic, whereas veins are mostly made up of fibrous tissue. The tunica media is relatively thicker, whereas tunica interna is relatively thinner but slightly muscular. The tunica media. Then tunica interna made up of endothelium membrane and basement membrane, and it is the same made up of endothelium membrane and basement membrane. Right. Now, elastic membranes, arteries have two elastic membranes, one internal and one external, whereas veins have only elastic internal elastic membrane. The arteries have a narrow lumen, whereas veins have a wider lumen. The arteries are non-valvular, whereas veins are valvular. Right. Then the blood flow and blood pressure, as we have discussed, the blood flow in the arteries, it is more with jerks because it is coming from the heart, and it has got comparatively more blood pressure, whereas in the veins it is a steady flow and it has got a very low blood pressure. And capillaries, arteries end with capillaries, whereas veins begin with capillaries. So what are these capillaries? So this this network like structure is what we are going to talk called as capillaries. Now we said that arteries are ending with capillaries and veins are beginning with capillaries. Right. So what are these capillaries? Now capillaries are these microscopic vessels that connect arterioles to venules. If you remember, when we were talking about the branching, we said that artery is the major one, artery is the major one. It branches into narrow arterioles, and arterioles end with even more narrower capillaries. Similarly, venules are the narrowest capillaries open into venule, which further begins into a thicker veins. So these capillaries, they basically are connecting the arteriole to the venule. So this is the arteriole, this is the venule, and they are connecting them together, forming the capillaries. And the flow of blood from arterioles to venules is called as microcirculation. So they are carrying out a process called as microcirculation. Now capillaries, they are of three types. Capillaries basically are of three types: the continuous ones, the fenestrated ones, and the sinusoid ones. Now if you can see, this is the walls of the capillary. This is the lumen and the lumen, and the white transparent one is the basement membrane, and the yellow structures are the endothelial cells. Right, in the continuous one, you can see there is no gaps between the cells. They are just small cleft like this. If you can observe, there are very small clefts. That means the cells, endothelial cells, they are present like this. Okay, as if they are like pieces of puzzle which are joining together. So this type of capillary is called as a continuous capillary. Now fenestrated capillaries means, if you can see clearly, there are a lot of pores or fenestrations which are present on the capillary endothelial cells. Whereas sinusoid means the basement membrane is also incomplete and the cells have lot of intercellular gap. So there is big gaps in the basement membrane and even big gaps in the intercellular spaces. So these are sinusoids. So you have basically three type of capillaries that are present, and each capillary will be at different locations. Similarly, functioning wise, you have two major type of capillaries. One is called as the pulmonary capillaries, which are mostly present in the lungs, capillaries which are formed in the lungs. And the second variety is called the systemic capillaries, which are present at various body parts and organs and tissues. It is present in various body parts, that includes both organs and tissues. Right? Now if you see, this is an artery. Right, now these structures are called meta-arterioles, the primary arterioles. Right, and then this is the venules and this is the veins. Right, and this area here, these are all the capillaries, and they form what is called as the capillary bed. Right, so from this there will be the exchange of whatever gases or whatever substances that need to be exchanged in the from the capillaries to whatever regions. Whether if it is systemic capillaries, then they'll take care of the exchange of oxygen and taking in of the carbon dioxide. Okay, if it's pulmonary capillaries, then they take oxygen inside and release carbon dioxide. Different purposes, but basically the exchange of the gases happen at the capillary bed. So how will be the blood flow if it's a systemic capillary? Okay, just let me remove a few of these things. If let's say it's a systemic artery, that means the blood is flowing from the heart. So the blood will move from the heart into the arteries. From the arteries, it will enter into the arterioles like this. Okay, and once it reaches the capillary bed, there will be the exchange of whatever substances, that is exchange of oxygen and taking in of the carbon dioxide will happen. Then the deoxygenated blood will slowly flow into the venules, and from the venules it will flow into the vein and then back to the heart. So this is blood vessels, the arteries, the capillaries and everything. Now what we are going to do is, we are now going to understand the concept of double circulation in the next video.
For more content, like, share and subscribe to www.i-win.in.